In the spring of 1943, over the skies of occupied Europe, German pilots faced a novel American fighter that would revolutionize aerial combat. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt emerged like no aircraft seen before. Its large radial engines protruded prominently forward. The thick fuselage seemed more fit for cargo transport than dogfighting. Short and stubby wings appeared inadequate for the nimble maneuvers typical of fighter engagements. Experienced German pilots, veterans of years of aerial combat, initially scoffed at these ungainly machines. They favored sleek, agile fighters engineered by some of the world's best aeronautical designers. However, within months, this dismissive attitude evolved into reluctant admiration, then fear, and finally a realization that the Americans had introduced something entirely new to European skies. A machine designed not for elegance but for destruction, not for demonstration but for survival, and not for individual glory but for industrial triumph. The tale of how German pilots came to respect the Thunderbolt stands as one of the most dramatic psychological shifts in aerial warfare. It concluded with 86,000 destroyed targets over a period of just 11 months. This is the story of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. On May 6, 1941, at Farmingdale, New York, test pilot Lowry Brabham climbed into the cockpit of an aircraft unlike any previously commissioned by the United States Army Air Forces. The Republic Aviation Corporation's latest fighter prototype sat on the runway like a tank with wings. Weighing in at 8 tons at maximum takeoff weight, it was more than twice as heavy as most contemporary fighters. Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian immigrant who served as Republic's chief designer, had crafted something unprecedented. When aerial combat reports from Europe in 1940 reached his desk, they painted a new reality of fighter warfare. Aviators required superior performance at altitudes surpassing 30,000 feet. They also demanded weaponry capable of taking down heavily armored aircraft. Durability was essential to withstand the formidable firepower of German and British fighter planes equipped with powerful machine guns and cannons. Kartveli discarded traditional approaches. Instead of focusing on agility and lightness, he prioritized power and resilience. The Pratt & Whitney R2000 double wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial powerhouse generating 2,000 horsepower, became the cornerstone of his design. However, integrating such a potent engine posed significant challenges. The turbocharger system necessitated extensive ductwork underneath the aircraft, contributing to the distinctive barrel-like profile of the P-47. Each gun held between 267 and 45 rounds, depending on its position, resulting in a total ammunition capacity of 400 rounds. When all 8 guns fired simultaneously, the weight of fire was unmatched by any other American fighter except for the Northrop 6-1 Black Widow night fighter. Brabham released the brakes and advanced the throttle. The massive radial engine thundered to full power. Witty yet purposeful. At 75 mm, Brabham pulled back on the stick. As it climbed through 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet, and 20,000 feet, the aircraft exhibited impeccable performance. By the time it reached 30,000 feet, where most fighters struggled with altitude, the Thunderbolt's turbocharger system demonstrated its effectiveness. The engine continued to deliver maximum power as Brabham pitched the nose downward into a steep dive. The airspeed indicator quickly rose past 400 imp, reaching 4.5 seed and approaching 550. After 45 minutes of flight, Brabham's report upon landing confirmed Kartveli's suspicions. They had developed a groundbreaking aircraft. While it may not be the most maneuverable or longest-range fighter, it could very well become the most survivable and heavily armed fighter plane on the planet. In June 1942, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the 56th Fighter Group started receiving their first P-47 Thunderbolts. Captain Robert Johnson, who would later become one of America's top aces, remembered his initial reaction as disbelief. "I thought they had delivered a medium bomber in error." The cockpit was positioned 9 feet above ground level when the tail wheel rested on the tarmac, requiring pilots to use a ladder to enter the aircraft. With such limited forward visibility while on the ground, crew chiefs often needed to guide pilots during taxiing operations. Weighing in at 14,000 pounds, 7 tons, the Thunderbolt left an impression of substantial weight upon landing. The spacious cockpit offered a welcome luxury for combat pilots, and even tall aviators who struggled to fit into other fighters found it accommodating. One pilot humorously noted that one could almost take a few steps inside during lengthy missions. This is an exaggeration, yet it highlights the extra space provided inside. The controls, despite being heavy, were in perfect synchronization with the aircraft's mass. Unlike the German B-59, which was agile and nimble, the P-47 asserted its dominance through sheer power and raw energy. In January 1943, Colonel Hubert Zika assumed command of the 56th Fighter Group. Prior to this, he had served as a combat observer with the Royal Air Force in 1940, gaining valuable experience against the Luftwaffe. Upon taking command, he quickly realized that the Thunderbolt required unique tactics compared to those employed by lighter fighters. German pilots were proficient in executing turning engagements at medium and low altitudes. Their aircraft could outmaneuver most Allied planes in these conditions. However, the P-47 possessed distinct advantages at higher elevations. Colonel Zaki devised a tactic called boom and zoom, which became central to Thunderbolt combat doctrine. The strategy involved climbing to 30,000 feet or above to achieve superior energy and positional superiority. Then, the pilot would dive onto enemy formations at speeds nearing or surpassing 500 mph, unleashing the aircraft's formidable 8-gun armament. Utilizing their speed and altitude advantage, pilots could disengage before the Germans had a chance to respond effectively. This method epitomized energy warfare in its purest sense. Although the P-47 couldn't match German fighters in terms of maneuverability, it excelled at diving attacks, outclimbing adversaries at high altitudes, and surviving damage that would have destroyed other fighter planes. Faith Airfield in England, under the directive of Major General William Captainer, who commanded the 8th Air Force fighter units. The primary objective was to provide escort for heavy bombers targeting German industrial facilities. Instructions were clear: engage enemy fighters only when absolutely necessary to protect the bomber formation. Upon reaching an altitude of 25,000 feet over the English Channel, the Thunderbolts rendezvoused with a squadron of Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses. The sky was filled with hundreds of 4-engine aircraft stretching for miles as they headed towards targets in occupied Europe. The first encounters occurred near the Belgian coast, where Messerschmitt Bf-10As and Focke-Wulf Foal 190s engaged American aircraft. German pilots had honed their tactics over 3 years of combat, identifying weaknesses in bomber formations and understanding the capabilities and limitations of escort fighters. However, they were still grappling with the performance characteristics of the Thunderbolt. Over the following months, Luftwaffe fighter units increasingly faced Thunderbolts during engagements, which consistently demonstrated a reluctance to engage in turning dogfights. On June 26, 1943, Lieutenant Robert Johnson, flying a P-47D with serial number 236 and nicknamed All Hell, experienced an event that would cement the Thunderbolt's legendary status. He had been escorting bombers deep into Germany but found himself alone on his return trip when he ran low on fuel. A squadron of German fighters suddenly appeared, initiating a relentless attack. This incident became one of the most extensively documented survival stories from World War II. German fighters raked Johnson's aircraft with hundreds of rounds, causing extensive damage. The canopy jammed shut, hydraulic fluid splattered across the windscreen, and control cables were severed. Bullet holes peppered the fuselage so thoroughly that Johnson counted over 2 Fison impacts upon landing. His wingman had fallen in combat, leaving him alone and severely damaged, just 200 meters from safety. Despite these dire circumstances, the P-47's Pratt & Whitney R200 Neat 9-Hendon engine continued to function, and its robust aluminum construction, along with redundant control systems, allowed the aircraft to remain airworthy. Johnson maneuvered his crippled Thunderbolt across occupied Europe without being able to bail out due to the jammed canopy. He battled to maintain altitude using damaged controls. A Focke-Wulf Fu-19DJ closed in alongside him, and its pilot stared at the badly damaged Thunderbolt through the bullet-riddled fuselage. Johnson was clearly visible, wounded but still conscious. No German fighter could have endured what the German had witnessed. Johnson was presumed to crash at any moment from the extent of damage inflicted upon his aircraft. However, Johnson managed to make it back to England despite the extensive damage. Upon landing, ground crews found that his plane bore 222 bullet and shell holes. The fuselage appeared more like scrap metal than an operational aircraft. News of Johnson's miraculous survival quickly spread through both American and German squadrons alike. For American pilots, it served as a testament to the legendary durability of their P-47 Thunderbolts. Meanwhile, among German pilots, this incident raised unsettling doubts about the resilience of their own aircraft. How could any plane sustain such extensive damage yet remain airworthy? What did this reveal about American engineering prowess? And what implications did this have for pilots who had grown accustomed to the relative fragility of their own fighter planes? On October 8, 1943, Major Hans Philipp, a distinguished Luftwaffe ace with over 200 confirmed victories, led his wing on an interception mission. Philipp epitomized the elite status within the Luftwaffe, having flown more than 500 combat missions and earning one of Germany's highest decorations, the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. With oak leaf, he was regarded as almost invincible by his peers. At an altitude of 30,000 feet over Germany, Philipp's formation came under attack by the 56th Fighter Group's Thunderbolts. The Americans held a significant height advantage. As his aircraft ascended into thinner air, Philipp noticed his engine starting to lose power. Designed primarily for combat below 25,000 feet, the Messerschmitt Bf 9 struggled at this elevation. The Thunderbolts began their descent. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, by loading an aircraft that had survived a June encounter with German forces, led his flight into firing position. His report on the engagement was concise. Visible hits along the fuselage indicated damage to Philipp's plane. Soon after, the aircraft exploded in mid-air. No parachute was observed. Hans Philipp, a veteran ace who had completed 500 missions, met his end swiftly. This incident sent shockwaves through Luftwaffe squadrons. If even a seasoned pilot like Philipp could not survive against these American fighters, what chance did ordinary pilots stand? The once ridiculed Thunderbolt, now known as the Flying Barrel, had dispatched one of Germany's top aviators. By autumn 1943, American fighter tactics were fully developed. Instead of engaging in dogfights, Thunderbolt pilots utilized their altitude and speed to maintain an advantage over German aircraft. German pilots found themselves increasingly forced into defensive maneuvers at lower altitudes, where they could not reach the Americans operating above 30,000 feet. Caught off guard by attacks from above, the P-47's limitations remained apparent: limited range and a fuel-hungry radial engine. The initial models could only escort bombers up to the German border before returning, but engineers tackled this issue methodically. In August 1943, 75-gallon drop tanks were introduced, extending the range to 230 miles. By September, paper tanks with a capacity of 18 gallons increased the range to 275 miles. Wing pylons equipped for fuel in April 1944 further extended the combat radius to 45 miles, though this still fell short of reaching Berlin. The North American P-51 Mustang would ultimately be responsible for that mission. However, within its operational limits, the Thunderbolt proved highly effective. As 1944 began, U.S. strategists identified a new objective that leveraged the Thunderbolt's strengths. In January 1944, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force initiated planning for Operation Overlord, which was set to invade Normandy. Ensuring air superiority over the landing zones was crucial. Yet beyond this, planners required something more: the systematic destruction of German transportation infrastructure. This involved targeting every railroad, bridge, supply depot, and troop concentration, missions that would expose aircraft to intense anti-aircraft fire. The P-47 Thunderbolt was uniquely suited for such tasks. Its radial engine with 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows could withstand significant damage without failing. Losing 2 or 3 cylinders still allowed the engine to continue running smoothly. Additionally, its straight-wing design provided stability during dive bombing and strafing runs. Its 850 caliber machine guns were devastating against ground targets. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan of the Cheddar-Lieber-Tile 60th Fighter Squadron within the 353 Fighter Group pioneered low-level attack tactics in March 1944. An aggressive Texan, Duncan convinced commanders to evaluate the Thunderbolt's potential as a fast and efficient strafer at low altitudes. He led demonstration missions that showcased the aircraft's capabilities against ground targets, exceeding expectations. Thunderbolts were capable of diving from high altitudes, engaging targets at speeds nearing 400 miles per hour, absorbing defensive fire, and climbing back to safety. Pilots honed their skills in identifying targets from great heights, planned attack runs to reduce exposure to flak, and synchronized timing for coordinated strikes by multiple aircraft. By April 1, 1944, every P-47 group within the 9th Air Force had transitioned to the fighter bomber role. They trained extensively with dive bombing techniques using 550U 1,000 pounds of bombs and mastered the M8 rockets, referred to as bazookas by pilots. Strafing tactics were refined using their 8-gun armament, allowing them to become proficient ground attack specialists while retaining their air combat capabilities. As D-Day neared, Thunderbolts wreaked havoc across northern France. Railroad yards were engulfed in flames, bridges crumbled, and supply convoys exploded on the roads. Airfields turned into crater-riddled wastelands. The attacks covered a wide area from Brittany to Pas-de-Calais, deliberately confusing German intelligence about the precise location of the impending invasion. Recognizing this threat, German commanders bolstered their anti-aircraft defenses. 88-minute track defenses, 48-minute tracks deployed around vital infrastructure, while lighter 20-minute track structure, with 30-minute tracks, provided protection for convoys and troop positions. Even small arms fire posed a significant danger to low-flying aircraft. For every 100 sorties flown, fewer than 1 aircraft was lost. The sturdy design that had saved Robert Johnson now protected numerous other pilots as well. Aircraft returned with missing engine cylinders, shredded control surfaces, destroyed hydraulic systems, and punctured fuel tanks, yet continued flying. Lieutenant Ray Murphy piloted a P-47 known as Chief Seattle. On January 22, 1944, his flight targeted the 6th SS Panzer Army, which was being transported eastward by train. The sky was filled with flak. Murphy's plane sustained damage from 245 Ninev's 25th Ninev's shells. These hits blew out a tire, damaged the hydraulic system, and knocked 2 cylinders off the engine. Despite the extensive damage, Murphy managed to fly his crippled aircraft back to base for 75 miles. Upon landing with 1 intact tire and 1 blown-out tire, 7 tons of Thunderbolt veered off the runway into a snow-covered field due to compromised landing gear. To prevent fire, Murphy shut down the engine and escaped without injury. Chief Seattle resumed combat operations following repairs. It met its end in a takeoff accident on April 18, 1945, having endured months of battle that would have destroyed most aircraft multiple times over. June 6, 1944 marked D-Day, when Operation Overlord commenced with the largest amphibious invasion ever undertaken. On this day alone, Allied air forces conducted over 14,000 sorties. Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force provided close air support for troops landing on the beaches. They attacked German strongholds and interdicted roads to hinder reinforcements reaching the coast. Additionally, they flew combat air patrol over the invasion fleet. The Luftwaffe made brief appearances but were overwhelmed and ineffective. Years of attrition had severely depleted Germany's fighter strength. Experienced pilots were either killed or captured, leaving behind inadequately trained replacements. Fuel scarcity restricted flight time, while aircraft production suffered due to relentless Allied strategic bombing raids. Thunderbolts consistently appeared overhead whenever German forces attempted to move. The methodical destruction of transportation infrastructure began to yield results. Armored divisions found themselves immobilized for days on end, as they could previously traverse those same distances in mere hours. Supply columns were forced to travel under the cover of darkness, avoiding aerial detection during daylight hours. By this point, using railroads had become an extremely risky proposition. Pilots grew intimately familiar with France's road network, memorizing key landmarks, river crossings, and towns along their routes. Coordination between air and ground forces was facilitated through radio communication, allowing tank commanders to request precise air support based on target descriptions. Within minutes of receiving such requests, Thunderbolt pilots would arrive overhead, identify the designated targets, and engage them. On July 29, 1944, during Operation Cobra, American forces launched a breakout from Normandy near Rosny. Trapped German units attempted to escape but were intercepted by the 46th Fighter Group on the road from 3:10 p.m. until 9:40 p.m. Various sources have reported differing casualty figures, but the sheer scale of damage was evident. Dozens of tanks were obliterated, while hundreds of vehicles and artillery pieces lay strewn across miles of road. The thorough destruction rendered any attempt at retreat futile. This scenario repeated itself throughout France. German troops trying to withdraw encountered relentless aerial bombardment that devastated their units as Allied ground forces closed in from all sides. In August 1944, the pocket became a killing field where Thunderbolts and other Allied aircraft decimated trapped German formations. Joseph Priller, an experienced Luftwaffe ace, who had initially doubted the effectiveness of Thunderbolts in early 1943, witnessed his forces being dismantled from above. After the war, he acknowledged his mistake. "We laughed at them back then. Nobody laughs now." Priller noted that Thunderbolt guns never jammed or overheated, and that the aircraft outperformed all expectations. He referred to it as the ideal fighter bomber. Post-war statistics revealed the extent of destruction inflicted by P-47 Thunderbolts from D-Day on June 6, 1944, until VE Day on May 8, 1945, a span of 11 months. The aircraft destroyed or damaged over 86,000 railcars, nearly 9,000 locomotives, approximately 6,000 armored vehicles, and more than 68,000 trucks across all European theaters. These figures were based on conservative estimates derived from gun camera footage and pilot reports that could be verified, though actual damage was likely even greater. Following the departure of aircraft, numerous targets were set ablaze. Ground forces and artillery subsequently dismantled vehicles that had been previously damaged by aerial bombardment. Given the disorderly nature of combat, exact record-keeping was challenging. However, even conservative estimates painted a clear picture. Over an 11-month period, Thunderbolt pilots systematically crippled Germany's capacity to mobilize troops and transport supplies. Each locomotive destroyed rendered trains incapable of operation. Every railroad car knocked out prevented supplies from reaching the front lines. With each truck obliterated, units lost their mobility, and every tank put out of commission meant less armored strength available for combat. They shifted operations to nighttime hours, dispersed troops to reduce large targets, and concealed vehicles or dug in when aircraft were nearby. Nevertheless, these measures had inherent limitations. Modern mechanized warfare necessitated constant movement. Supplies needed to reach soldiers on the ground. Reinforcements had to arrive at strategic points. Armored divisions required flexibility to maneuver effectively. Any such movement inevitably invited further aerial assault. On December 16, 1944, this situation culminated in the Ardennes forest. Germany initiated Operation Watch on the Rhine with an unexpected assault through Belgium, designed to divide Allied troops. American intelligence failed to detect the military buildup due to poor weather conditions that hindered aerial surveillance. German armored divisions were concealed in dense forests by cloud cover and fog, ensuring tactical surprise during their offensive. The attack swiftly penetrated American defenses, resulting in a significant bulge in the Allied front lines. This engagement became known as the Battle of the Bulge, involving 600,000 U.S. soldiers and marking it as one of the largest land battles in which the United States Army was involved. Cloud, snow, and fog that grounded Allied aircraft for several days. Once the skies cleared on December 23, American air power demonstrated its dominance over the 47 Thunderbolts patrolled the front lines continuously, locating and engaging German supply columns and transportation routes whenever possible. Lieutenant First Class Leslie Bowes flew his P-47, nicknamed Blonde Trouble, on a strafing mission near Norstedt, Germany, on December 17. His flight leader had previously bombed a convoy of the Wehrmacht. As the aircraft pulled up after their attack runs, a massive explosion erupted below. A P-47 flying through the debris was hit by shrapnel, causing it to start smoking heavily. Radio chatter broke out amidst the chaos. Despite being damaged, the plane managed to continue its flight. The pilot fought desperately for control, and although struggling, the aircraft made it back across Allied lines before performing an emergency landing in a snow-covered field. Miraculously, the pilot emerged with only minor injuries. This incident further underscored the durability of Thunderbolts. On January 1, 1945, nearly 1,000 German fighters and bombers launched Operation Bodenplatte, a surprise attack on Allied airfields. They caught the Allies off guard, destroying over 200 aircraft on the ground, including many P-47s, but these losses were quickly replaced by American industry. In contrast, Germany suffered irreplaceable losses of more than 200 aircraft and nearly 300 pilots during Bodenplatte. By late January 1945, German resistance in the Ardennes had collapsed. Allied forces eliminated the Bulge and resumed their advance toward Germany. Thunderbolts returned to systematically destroying German infrastructure, every bridge, marshalling yard, and supply depot. The relentless campaign continued. First Lieutenant Robert Braille conducted low-level support missions from K-29 Airfield in Belgium throughout January 1945. He emphasized the close coordination between ground forces and aerial units. Tank commanders communicated coordinates over the radio. Fighter pilots above identified targets based on detailed descriptions provided by ground troops. You might receive a call from an infantryman in a Sherman tank who would relay information such as, "There's a German tank concealed behind a small farmhouse with a red roof that needs to be bombed." However, at high altitude, many farmhouses with red roofs were visible, making target identification challenging. This allowed them to guide airstrikes personally while understanding both pilot terminology and battlefield conditions from a ground perspective. This collaboration significantly enhanced the effectiveness of these missions. In the war's final months, German forces began retreating across the Rhine River as Allied armies advanced up to 50 miles in some days. Thunderbolt aircraft roamed extensively over Germany, targeting enemy assets. They encountered columns of horse-drawn artillery, indicating a complete collapse of German logistics. Trains loaded with supplies were also found and destroyed before they could reach their destinations. Pilots faced increasing risks from small arms fire as desperate German soldiers fired at any airborne targets. Despite these dangers, the durability of the Thunderbolt aircraft continued to protect pilots' lives. Lieutenant Cliff Sari's P-47 was hit by a 20 mm Error 37 mm shell in his engine and cowling while strafing trucks near Saarmund on November 20, 1944. Despite damaged cylinders, the engine continued to run. Oil splattered onto the windshield, rendering visibility nearly impossible. His wingman guided him back to base, which was 155 miles away. The plane landed safely. In April 1945, Allied forces advanced deep into German territory. Though the end of the war was drawing near, Thunderbolt pilots continued to fly daily missions. Lieutenant First Class Raymond Knight from the 356th Fighter Squadron of the 356th Fighter Group repeatedly volunteered to lead assaults on enemy airfields. On April 24 and 25, he flew his P-47D, nicknamed O Johnny, into intense ground fire during low-altitude reconnaissance and strafing missions. Knight's relentless attacks destroyed many German aircraft on the ground, but on April 25, ground fire hit his plane during a strafing run. The Thunderbolt crashed, and Knight perished in the impact. In Europe, they mark as highest military decoration. Final statistics highlighted the Thunderbolt's significant impact: over 746,000 sorties of all types, an aerial kill ratio of 4:1, more than 7,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. Over half of the missions involved air-to-air combat, while the majority were ground attack operations. The loss rate per mission was 0.7%, an impressively low figure given the intensity of the fighting. The massive production scale underscored the United States' industrial might during this period. However, sheer numbers do not fully convey the significance of the Thunderbolt. This plane marked a pivotal shift in fighter design philosophy. Earlier fighters prioritized agility, speed, and lightness, whereas the P-47 focused on firepower, durability, and survivability. The primary goal was to ensure pilot safety and return aircraft undamaged or minimally damaged from missions. This design philosophy aligned with American strategic thinking. The ability to produce thousands of fighters and train an equivalent number of pilots was crucial. Every pilot who survived their initial deployment could potentially undertake a second tour, and any aircraft that managed to land despite damage could be repaired and reused in combat. In contrast, German fighters were often elegant and highly performant but frequently lacked durability compared to the P-47. A single strike on a Bf-10-9's cooling system often forced German pilots to make an emergency landing. Any damage to the control systems typically led to the loss of the aircraft. As a result, many German aviators frequently had no option but to parachute from their damaged fighters. In contrast, American pilots flying Thunderbolts could often bring their severely injured planes back home safely. The psychological toll on German flyers was significant. The realization that enemy aircraft could endure substantial damage while their own could not caused ongoing anxiety. Each combat mission entailed greater danger. Every damaged fighter resulted in a pilot being either killed or captured, rather than returning as a repairable machine. Luftwaffe Ace Heinsberg, who survived the conflict with 2020 confirmed victories, highlighted the German pilots' newfound respect for the Thunderbolt. He noted that the P-47 could withstand an astounding amount of gunfire and required careful handling. This assessment from a pilot with 6 years of combat experience against all Allied fighter types, and among the Luftwaffe's most accomplished survivors, carried considerable weight. The shift in attitudes was dramatic, evolving from ridicule in April 1943 to fearful admiration by 1945. The Thunderbolt went from being derided as a flying barrel to being recognized as an ideal fighter bomber. Even after the war's conclusion, tummed not from sleek design but from sheer durability and capability. Even after the war's conclusion, Thunderbolts continued in service. They remained in frontline use with the United States Air Force until 1949. Foreign air forces operated P-47s well into the 1950s. The Brazilian Air Force received a Presidential Unit Citation in the 1980s for their wartime Thunderbolt operations in Italy. Their first fighter squadron flew 40-45 missions from November 1944 to May 1945, demonstrating that the Thunderbolt's capabilities extended far beyond those of American forces alone. The 56th Fighter Group operated P-47 Thunderbolts throughout World War II and recorded an impressive tally of 677.5 aerial victories, as well as 398 aircraft in the process, losing only 20 aircraft in the process. Unlike other units within the 8th Air Force, they declined to switch to P-51 Mustangs, maintaining their preference for Thunderbolts throughout. This dedication highlighted the pilot's trust in the aircraft's design. Colonel Francis Gabreski, who emerged as the top American ace in Europe with 28 confirmed victories, all achieved flying P-47s, later reflected on the fighter's attributes. He praised its spacious cockpit, reliability, and capability to bring pilots safely back home. While acknowledging that it wasn't the fastest or most nimble aircraft, he maintained that it was the best bomber escort of the war. A few surviving Thunderbolts have become cherished relics of wartime aviation history. Museums across the globe house P-47s, with a select number still airworthy and often seen at air shows and commemorative events. When these restored planes take flight, their powerful Air-2000 radial engines generate an unmistakable deep roar that resonates with the aircraft's formidable presence. Modern military aviation has drawn inspiration from the Thunderbolt's design philosophy, which emphasized heavily armed, well-protected attack aircraft, prioritizing survivability over speed and agility. The Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, developed in the 1970s for close air support missions, pays homage to this legacy with its name. Nicknamed the Warthog, it embodies similar principles: robust armament, armor protection, durability, damage tolerance, and continued flight capability. Despite not being the most aesthetically pleasing or fastest fighter of World War II, the P-47 Thunderbolt stands out for its combat effectiveness, high pilot survival rates, destructive power, and ability to transform enemy perceptions from derision to fear. With an estimated 86,000 targets destroyed over roughly 11 months, the Thunderbolt's record in these metrics places it among the greatest fighters ever built. From D-Day to VE Day, railroad cars, locomotives, armored vehicles, and trucks played a crucial role in dismantling Germany's military logistics. This relentless effort to cripple the enemy's capacity to move, supply, and fight was known as the Thunderbolt's legacy. Captain Varro, who radioed on April 15, 1943, that the Americans were flying barrels, survived the war but did not return to combat after being wounded in 1944. In post-war interviews, he admitted his initial assessment had been incorrect. These seemingly ungainly aircraft turned out to be some of the most effective combat planes during World War II. Initially derogatory remarks from seasoned pilots who judged aircraft solely by appearance, flying barrel became a term that struck fear into enemies as German forces retreated and supply lines were systematically destroyed under relentless aerial assault. Every truck lost meant fewer supplies reaching the front lines. Food, ammunition, fuel, medical aid, and spare parts, all contributing to the erosion of Germany's military might. With 60,000 trucks destroyed, units found themselves unable to move or fight due to a lack of necessary resources. Furthermore, 9,000 locomotives were obliterated. Given that rail transport was essential for moving large volumes of war materials, each train halted meant disrupted logistics and delayed reinforcements at marshalling yards. Wounded soldiers also faced difficulties being evacuated while German armored formations, once formidable spearheads in blitzkrieg tactics, saw their strength eroded by continuous air attacks. A total of 6,000 armored vehicles were destroyed: tanks, self-propelled guns, and armored personnel carriers, all reducing Germany's combat effectiveness significantly. Units that started campaigns at full strength often arrived on battlefronts with only a fraction of their vehicles due to relentless attrition. Over 86,000 railroad cars were destroyed, a staggering figure representing the systematic dismantling of vital supply infrastructure. Each car could transport tons of essential supplies, meaning millions of tons of food, ammunition, fuel, and equipment never reached German forces. These numbers came from gun camera footage and pilot reports, constituting conservative estimates. Actual destruction likely exceeded documented figures due to secondary explosions and fires continuing after initial attacks. Nevertheless, even these conservative figures tell an undeniable story. American industrial output, manifesting as fighter aircraft production and pilot training programs, culminated in a tactical doctrine that systematically destroyed enemy logistical capabilities. The flying barrel, initially mocked in 1943, had by 1945 become the primary tool for disrupting German military supply lines. This strategy extended beyond World War II, influencing modern military strategists who studied the Thunderbolt campaign and recognized the effectiveness of air superiority combined with systematic interdiction against even well-equipped ground forces. The concept of deep battle attacking enemy logistics and reserves before they reach the front line was validated by Thunderbolt operations in Europe. The P-47's design highlighted the trade-offs inherent in aircraft engineering, balancing factors like firepower and survivability over agility and range. This choice proved correct for the missions the aircraft ultimately undertook. Durability was more crucial than maneuverability for ground attack missions. Surviving enemy fire took precedence over achieving top speed. Fighter pilots came to realize that tactics played a significant role alongside the performance of their aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zeke's boom and zoom doctrine enabled Thunderbolt pilots to capitalize on the strengths of their planes while circumventing their weaknesses. High-altitude energy fighting neutralized the German advantage in turning ability. Diving attacks leveraged the power and weight of the aircraft as formidable weapons. This strategic shift transformed the Thunderbolt from an average dogfighter into a potent energy fighter. The 56th Fighter Group's steadfast commitment to flying the Thunderbolt, even when other units switched to Mustangs, underscored their trust in the aircraft's capabilities. These pilots had flown combat missions daily for 2 years and were intimately familiar with both the strengths and limitations of the Thunderbolts. Their decision to continue using them spoke volumes about the plane's inherent qualities. Contemporary pilots who fly restored Thunderbolts often describe the aircraft as feeling solid, stable, and powerful. The controls are heavy but responsive, and once in flight, visibility is excellent. The noise and vibration from the massive radial engine provide continuous feedback, instilling confidence through its sheer solidity. One pilot likened flying a Thunderbolt to driving a tank, which was meant as high praise rather than criticism. Beyond its combat statistics, the Thunderbolt symbolized American industrial philosophy applied to warfare: build it robustly, build it reliable, and accept added weight in exchange for superior capability. Balancing both quantity and quality is crucial, rather than striving solely for peak performance at the expense of everything else. Why? Each aircraft required thousands of parts sourced from subcontractors throughout the United States and assembled by Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, New York, and Evansville, Indiana. The logistics, quality control measures, and workforce training necessary to produce more than 15,000 intricate aircraft during wartime were significant organizational accomplishments that paralleled the technical excellence of the design itself. Each P-47 that emerged from the production line symbolized American economic strength translated into military capability. Aluminum extracted from bauxite mines, steel forged in Pittsburgh, rubber produced in synthetic plants, electronics supplied by radio manufacturers, and instruments crafted in precision machine shops all contributed to this effort. Engines were built at Pratt & Whitney's factories before being sent to Republic Aviation for final assembly. While German aircraft manufacturers created exceptional designs, they could not match the American production volumes. For instance, the Focke-Wulf FD-190, Germany's best piston engine fighter, saw 20,000 units produced throughout the war, more than the Thunderbolt but over a longer period. The Messerschmitt BFD FD-79, Germany's most prolific fighter plane, reached approximately 33,000 examples across various models and 6 years of conflict. American fighter production between 1940 and 1945 amounted to more than 19,000 aircraft, including P-40 Warhawks, P-1000 Thunderbolts, P-1001 Mustangs, P-63 King Cobras, and P-80 Shooting Stars. The massive output far exceeded Axis production capabilities. For every German fighter shot down, American factories churned out 2, 3, and eventually 5 replacements. This production capability, coupled with better pilot training and innovative tactics, created a formidable combination that the Germans could not overcome. As time progressed, German pilots encountered larger numbers of increasingly skilled opponents, flying more advanced aircraft. The attrition rate overwhelmingly favored the Allies. Experienced German pilots perished in greater numbers, while their replacements arrived with limited experience. Material shortages forced the substitution of inferior components and simplification of designs, further diminishing aircraft quality. A Thunderbolt played a significant role in this attrition cycle. Its low loss rate allowed pilots to complete multiple combat tours, while its formidable armament made it lethal both in aerial and ground engagements. The durability of the aircraft ensured that even damaged planes could return for repair and reuse. Over time, these factors multiplied the Thunderbolt's overall effectiveness. In summary, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt stands as one of history's most effective combat aircraft, not because it excelled in any single performance metric, but because it was exceptionally proficient at its intended missions. It safeguarded pilots, systematically degraded enemy capabilities, and evolved from being ridiculed to becoming a dreaded weapon of war. Over 11 months, the Thunderbolt destroyed nearly 86,000 targets, an astounding figure that translates to approximately 700-800 targets per month, or roughly 205 targets daily. This relentless campaign aimed to cripple the enemy's capabilities, earning it a mocking nickname from the Germans, Flying Beer Keg. Yet, history has come to regard this aircraft as one that played a crucial role in winning World War II, with its persistent efforts contributing significantly to the downfall of Nazi Germany.